Idrimi was the king of Alalakh in the 15th century BCC, 1460–1400 BC. He was a Hurrianised son of Ilim-Ilimma I, the king of Halab, now Aleppo, who had possibly been deposed by the new regional master, Barattarna or Parshatatar, king of the Mitanni. Nevertheless, he succeeded in gaining the throne of Alalakh with the assistance of a group known as the Habiru. Idrimi founded the kingdom of Mukish and ruled from Alalakh as a vassal to the Mitanni state. He also invaded the Hittite territories to the north, resulting in a treaty with the country Kizzuwatna. Idrimi is known from an inscription on a statue found at Alalakh by Leonard Woolley in the 1930s and 1940s, revealing new insights about the history of Syria in the mid-second millennium. Sources of Idrimi. Statue text. Idrimi Tablet 1. This tablet shown left was excavated by Leonard Woolley between 1936–1949 at Barattarna, Alalakh. It dates back to c. 1500–1450 BC. The tablet contained Idrimi's royal seal and revealed an agreement that Idrimi made for the annual dues of gold and sheep to be paid to him or to his successor, his son Nikmepa, who often used his own father's seal. The seal's inscription also read, Idrimi, servant of the god Idad, the local storm god in Alalakh. The tablet suggested that Idrimi not only wielded absolute power in Alalakh, but it also suggested that Idrimi had exercised some independence through his own self-deification. Idrimi Tablet 2. This tablet shown right was excavated at Barattarna in northern Syria between 1936–1949 and dates back to c. 1480 BC. It was a treaty that Idrimi made with another vassal ruler to Mitanni, Pilia of Kizzuwatna. The treaty was for slave exchanges between Idrimi and Pilia. Early life of Idrimi. In the first part of Idrimi's autobiography on his statue, it is claimed that an incident had occurred in Halab and that he and his family had to flee as a result. Jack M. Sasson of the University of North Carolina speculated that Idrimi didn't claim any relationship to Halab's rulers. He argued that Ilim-Ilimma I, Idrimi's father, was either dethroned or had unsuccessfully attempted to usurp the throne of Halab from an unknown king. Idrimi goes to Amar because of his maternal ancestral connections to the lords of Amar. While living in Amar, he considered himself as a slave. According to Tremper Longman, lines 8–9 of the autobiography indicate that Idrimi may have considered retaking his father's lost throne, and that he tried to involve his brothers in his cause. As his brothers declined to participate, Idrimi went to Alalakh alone but then fled to Amia in the land of Canaan. According to Mark van de Meerup, Idrimi was unhappy at Amar for being an underling. There is no scholarly debate that is adequate enough to explain why Idrimi chose to live among the Habiru in Canaan, though it is psychologically clear that Idrimi got along well with the other refugees. It was because they went through a similar experience of being uprooted from their own hometowns. Another possibility, by looking at Tremper Longman's theory, is that Idrimi was recruiting potential allies in a greater effort to take Alalakh. But it is clear from these various scholarly speculations that a political motivation may be involved in Idrimi's desire to take back Alalakh. This motive is further indicated by author Garrett Galvin, who compared Idrimi's story to the famous Egyptian work The Story of Sinu. Idrimi was similar to Sinu in the sense that he was a high-class refugee looking back to his roots and finding an opportunity to take back his throne while being fueled by humiliation and anger towards his political enemies. Galvin also argued that Idrimi's attitude of being from a higher social class overcame the hardships he had as a refugee. The decision to take back Alalakh. After 7 years living among the Habiru in Canaan c. 1497 BC, seeking an opportunity to take back his throne, Idrimi found his chance. Edward Greenstein and David Marcus' translation of the inscription on lines 29–34 revealed that following the storm god Teshub's advice in a dream, Idrimi made ships and had auxiliary troops board them and proceeded via the sea to Mukish. Mukish, now, when my country heard of me, they brought me large cattle and small cattle. This newfound alliance with local rulers, created by cattle exchanges, was just the beginning of the gradual restoration of Idrimi's royal status as the king of Alalakh. Edward Greenstein's and David Marcus's translation of the inscription on lines 42–51 revealed that despite Barattarna's hostility to Idrimi while he was in exile in Canaan, he actually respected Idrimi's coalition, maybe submitting to Idrimi out of fear that his social outcast army could overthrow him. Idrimi said that King Parshatatar for 7 years was hostile to me. I sent Anwanda to Barattarna, the mighty king, the king of the Hurrian warriors, and told him of the treaties of my ancestors, and that our actions were pleasing to the former kings of the Hurrian warriors, for they had made a binding agreement. The mighty king heard of the treaties of our predecessors and the agreement. Here, possibly influenced by the nature of Hittite oaths, Idrimi swore loyalty to Parshatatar after 7 years despite him overthrowing his father on the throne in Aleppo. He made his request to the throne peacefully by restoring Barattarna's estate and swore him an ultimate Hurrian loyalty oath, which was the first step to Idrimi regaining his power again. The inscription in lines 42–51 of Greenstein and Marcus's translation described Idrimi's capture of Alalakh as a peaceful effort to appease Barattarna with tributes of restoring his estate and swearing a loyalty. Mark van de Meerup mentioned that Idrimi captured Alalakh, implying a warfare approach that the inscription doesn't give. Author Paul Collins described Idrimi's maneuver as a greeting present, the traditional form of establishing and maintaining friendly relations between rulers, even those of different rank, and reminded him Barattarna of earlier oaths sworn between the kings of Halab Aleppo and the kings of Mitanni. Also, Collins mentioned that Barattarna had accepted Idrimi's tribute to him as a loyal vassal ruler. He only allowed Idrimi limited independence of making his own military and diplomatic decisions just as long as it didn't interfere with Mitanni's overall policy. This further allowed Idrimi to set his sights on his diplomatic and military aims in Kizzuwatna and act as an independent ruler. Idrimi's capture of Alalakh was evidenced in his statue inscription and Collins' analysis as a peaceful movement rather than a military movement. The rule of Idrimi in Alalakh. After Idrimi's success in establishing a peaceful agreement with King Barattarna of Mitanni sometime around 1490 BC, most of his actions as king are vaguely written and are limited to only smaller sources. Tablets 1 and 2 at the British Museum are great primary sources about Idrimi's actions during his rule, but it's not enough to just look at those 2 tablets as a whole description of Idrimi's rule. Strong scholarly consensus argued by ancient Syro-Palestine scholars Dominique Collin and Gary Aller also suggested that Idrimi led cross-border raids into Hittite territory during his rule. According to Collin, he raided Hittite territory and used the booty from that raid to build his massive palace. Gary Aller, in his 1977 dissertation, further confirmed Collins' statement by reaffirming Idrimi's statement in lines 64–77 of his statue inscription that he raided 7 cities somewhere near the city of Gaziantep in modern-day Turkey. According to Edward Greenstein and David Marcus' translation of Idrimi's statue inscription, "Then I took troops and attacked Hatti land, as for the 7 cities under their protection." Gary Aller gave some validity to the existence of the cities sacked in Idrimi's raid by mentioning 2 of the 7 Hatti cities of Hushuakashim and Zarna in Hattusili-I's annals from his reign in c. 1580–1556 BC. The annals mentioned that Hattusili-I destroyed Zarna in his 5th campaign and defeated a coalition of Hushua and Halab cities also mentioned by Idrimi in his statue inscription. Lines 77–78 from Greenstein's and Marcus's translation of the statue inscription confirmed Collins' argument of what Idrimi did with his booty. "Then I returned to Mukish and entered my capital Alalakh with the captives goods, and property, and possessions which I brought down from Hittite. I had a palace built. The inscription from lines 78-86 of that same translation states, I made my regime like the regime of kings. I made my brothers like royal brothers, my sons like their sons, and my relatives their relatives. The inhabitants who were in my land I made to dwell securely, and even those who did not have a dwelling I settled. Then I ordered. It is also possible that he supported the gods of Amar and the cults of the storm god Teshub, if one looks at the brief mentions of those gods in his statue inscriptions during the early phases of his life. Debate on Sharuwa the scribe and his blessing of the statue. In the final parts of the statue inscription, Idrimi commissioned the scribe Sharuwa to write his statue inscription, invoking major blessings for those who respect his statues and cursings by the gods to anyone who would defile his statue. Jack M. Sasson of the University of North Carolina contended that Sharuwa wrote the inscription for selfish reasons to bolster his national pride. This was indicated by the fact that Idrimi's statue was not found in level 4 in Woolley's time, but on level 1b 1250–1200 BC. Dominique Collin refuted his arguments by saying that many of the documents associated with Idrimi in the level 4 Alalakh palace archives discovered by Woolley were associated with his reign in 1490–1460. Idrimi's rule in tablet #1. The royal seal of Idrimi. This tablet or seal was one of only 2 recorded sources of Idrimi from the British Museum. The tablet was Idrimi's royal seal, which contained his accounts of goodwill gifts of silver and other forms of tribute like cattle from Mukish and Zelki and other nearby cities, possibly demonstrating a tribute system among his allied city-states dating back to his alliance with them during his exile. His seal represented his act of piety towards the Shutu people and to those who had no settled abode, to show his generosity as a king and former Habiru refugee as he rebuilt his cities. It is clear from the inscriptions on the seal that Idrimi ruled within level Roman 4 in the mid to late Bronze Age with piety and wise administration, and that it was subsequently used by his son and successor Nickmepa as his royal. If Nickmepa used his father's royal seal for his own royal seal, which contained the names of his predecessors Abaddon, Sarir and Naram, it is implied that Idrimi would have those same names on his royal seal, indicating his need for legitimacy from his previous Hurrian rulers, who made oaths to legitimize their claims to the throne according to his statue inscription. Royal seals were frequently used in the Hittite Empire and Hurrian regions in northern Syria to demonstrate the king's power in Idrimi's time. They were made up of a material of glass and silica called phalanx. The phalanx was heated at a lower temperature so that the surface could have a glazed appearance, allowing them to be easily carved and cheaply produced. The seal could suggest a possible theory that despite the Hittites being a political rival to Idrimi, he adapted the Hittite-style royal seal along with Hittite-style oaths of loyalty he made to Parshatatar and Pilia. Allah theorized that Idrimi's predecessors in his royal seal were Halabian rulers of the 16th century BC of an independent. Allah also proposed a theory that Idrimi's predecessors ruled Yamhad when Alalakh was a part of Yamhad's territory, though that theory has not been confirmed by other scholars. Idrimi's rule in tablet #2, Idrimi's treaty to Pilia of Kizzuwatna, Kia of Kizzuwatna. This tablet from several treaty texts revealed that Idrimi had somehow exchanged other slaves or fugitives with Pilia of Kizzuwatna, which made sense considering that both Idrimi and Pilia were vassal kings to Barattarna. According to Donald L. Maggetti, the treaty was partly influenced by the swearing of oaths in the Hittite Empire, but only within the context of swearing oaths of loyalty. He argued that lines 40–43 of the treaty required that Barattarna, the Hittite king of Mitanni, approved the treaty before it could be effective, and that fugitives or slaves could be exchanged between Idrimi and Pilia only after the king approved the agreement. The treaty was concluded by Idrimi and Pilia following Idrimi's raids into Hittite territory. This may somewhat validate line 77 of Greenstein's and Marcus's translation of Idrimi's statue inscription "Together with them I took booty," suggesting that Idrimi led raids into Kizzuwatna and wanted to end them in order to gain Pilia's favor against bigger enemies like the Hittites as a buffer state. This favor was to be gained by a runaway slave clause within the treaty allowing ordinary citizens to retrieve runaway slaves for rewards of 500 copper shekels for a man and 1,000 shekels for a woman. A slave owner could also enter into Kizzuwatna and Alalakh to retrieve their runaway slaves for no reward. Idrimi as a comparative character to biblical characters. Most scholars agreed that Idrimi is comparative to other biblical characters like Abraham and David, suggesting that the Bible and Idrimi's statue autobiography had similar literary parallels different from standard Mesopotamian or Akkadian literature. Syriologist A. Leo Oppenheim also saw parallels between Idrimi and King David of Judah. Idrimi stayed for 7 years among Habiru warriors. After 7 years, the god Adu-Ortesha became favorable to him, and he started building ships. The king Barattarna was hostile to him for 7 years. In the 7th year, Idrimi launched negotiations with Barattarna. He also gathered spoils from 7 Hittite cities and built his own palace. David had a similar pattern with the number 7 too. He was the youngest of 7 sons of Jesse. He stayed 7 years in Hebron before conquering a Jebusite fortress outside of Jerusalem and renaming it the City of David. He also offered the elders of Judah gifts from spoils won during the raid, while Idrimi raided the 7 Hittite towns and gave those spoils to his allies, as mentioned in his inscription. For Edward Greenstein, the story of Idrimi was similar to the biblical stories of Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Jephthah, and Nehemiah. All 5 biblical figures in Idrimi were exiles in their younger days, undertook journeys to discover the divine will, and attributed their success in maintaining the well-being of their people to divine intervention.